The forces of history almost never culminate in a single day which will change everything. Day to day, nothing big ever changes. Yet things do change. The paradox. Everything takes time. I expect the vast majority of my fan base to be young men. Each one of you will experience these things if you live to your natural death. Your hair will thin, and eventually it will change its color to gray. If you marry your wife, once she was young and pretty, but she will age until she is no longer attractive. And ultimately, her aging will sterilize her, as it will sterilize you. Your body will gradually decline. Some of your organs and even systems will fail. Your remaining peers and relatives will die. And finally, you will die. Your children and grandchildren will mourn you for a small period of time, but eventually they'll forget about you, and you'll be forgotten forever. Humans are a colonial species. We care about our superorganisms, or civilizations, very dearly. Yet these things too, like us, decline and decay. They finally die and are ultimately forgotten. Sometimes they transform slowly over time, like the Frankish Empire into France. But sometimes they are lost forever, like the Mayan Empire. How much does the average NPC of Western civilization think about the Mycenaean Greeks in their lifetime? Maybe a few minutes? How often do they think about the Greek and Roman civilizations of iniquity? A few hours? They are now forgotten, and everyone who lived in them is now forgotten. Death conquers us all, and it will certainly conquer you and me. Yet we do not notice our first gray hairs, nor our second, and rarely the third. Our children grow up so fast because our perception of time is so poor. If you're like me, you've grown up in a world where there's a different apocalypse that's going to kill you every day. Or at least that's what the media tries to sell us. So in 2009, we had a swine flu. In 2010, the Koreans started attacking each other's borders with artillery. In 2012, there was a Mayan apocalypse. And 2020, there was the assassination of Soleimani. And now in 2020, we have this coronavirus pandemic. And I will admit, personally, I was largely right, but it was not a complete catastrophe. I was only semi-right. It was a major, at least this season of it, it was a major disruption to everyone's lives, and it killed and has proved far more dangerous than a normal seasonal flu. But it was not as dangerous as the great influenza or even SARS was. Yet, we have noticed that none of these has been an end of the world. And because of the way which these events were dramatized, we all feel that there's nothing that can ever happen which will get us out of this lock, this stranglehold, which is called the end of history. And the problem, and I think the reason why the media blows these things so out of proportion, is because we want to see an end to this bland mediocrity in some sense. The problem is that everybody wants to live in the end of the world because it means an escape from their day-to-day life, their day-to-day declining life, possibly. The problem is that there's no such thing as a zombie apocalypse. You don't get to go to the mall and the food never rots and all your best friends are with you fighting zombies and you have unlimited ammo, right? It's not some kind of fun open world game or fun movie where the good guys win in the end. What's happening, the world that I predict, the slow collapse of civilization predicated on the reality of dysgenics running rampant and the limitations of energy and eventual energy scarcity is not something which will just end the world tomorrow. It's a very slow decline. It's a decline akin to aging. The decline I predict isn't an end of the world. It's reality. It's gravity. It's simply maturity reaping its rewards. I will die. The United States will die. the Anglosphere will die. It's only a matter of time. Industrial civilization will come to its end, and the weight of resources, both human and material, have already assured this. When we have run out of our fossil fuels, when we will no longer be smart enough to even build and manage nuclear reactors, when we are desperately burning all the fuel that's left, it will not be the end of the world. It will simply be a transition to a future which looks like the 18th century, but with repeating rifles. And at that time, Malthus's laws would have stolen billions through wars, famine, and disease, and below replacement fatality, and what might be seen as little ends of the world. Little stumbles, things like a coronavirus pandemic, things like possibly a more deadly pandemic, or a regional nuclear war between India and Iran and Pakistan and Iran and Saudi Arabia, or mass famines through Africa. A Malthus-style collapse is not something which occurs over a day. It's something which declines civilization through a long period of attrition, which takes years, decades, maybe even centuries. There will not be a single day where it happens, just a slow decline towards our ultimate reality. And here's the problem. Every political movement must be optimistic and point towards an achievable future. So acknowledgement of this decline is by definition anti-political. You cannot prevent it. You can only mitigate it in the way that a middle-aged person can extend their life by cutting back on their salt intake. Because of this, it's not a popular opinion to take or even realize. And even those who understand this reality seldom talk about it for uninterrupted periods of time. I dwell upon my own death only in the comfort of my own faith. People do not dwell upon the end of their civilization, save but in the comfort of apathy. They think about their prospects for the future. And that's what we are designed to do. We're designed deep down in our genes to be optimistic, to think that we can innovate our way out of this bottleneck which is forming. We are always too optimistic, perhaps, because as you can see now, we don't try to prevent crises. We just try to react to them. We have known about We'll know that oil is peaked decades after. We'll know that natural gas is peaked decades after. We will sleepwalk into this decline because that's how our nature works. Normalcy bias leads to poor choices in a crisis, and these poor choices will compound over time, leading into the Malthus trap which we have buried ourselves in. We will always be reaching towards unachievable technology, like fusion power or solar power, which actually works, even when we no longer have arms to reach. We will persist on a return to normalcy until we are lying in the midst of ruins.